Hello and welcome. I am Humphrey Hawksley with Goldster's Purpose, Passion and Grit, where today we are talking to a warrior of the war on terror. We're going to get riveting stories from a spy and then an FBI agent, same person, on how America tracks its enemies. She has hunted down terrorists. She's stopped weapons of mass destruction plots before they could kill. And yet she is an all-California girl who joined the FBI and helped catch foreign spies on American soil. Her purpose, passion, and grit, we call it, has taken her on missions through North Africa, Europe, and the Middle East. And we're going to hear a story about catching one of those dangerous foreign agents working on American soil. And as I read it, I wondered if it was the lovely KGB agent Jack Barsky, who was on our show a few weeks back and worked for the Soviet Union while raising an American family. And while she was doing that, my guest, who is sitting quietly and elegantly beside me, opened up a war on a second front to combat rampant sexism against women within the intelligence communities. And her book, The Unexpected Spy, has been optioned by Netflix, and it has just been announced 2 weeks ago. She'll be joining News Nation as a national security contributor. So how does she face the most dangerous situations and keep going until the job gets done? Why not ask her yourself? Welcome, Tracy Walder, to Purpose, Passion, and Grit.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
It's brilliant. Now we've painted a picture of you as a very sort of tough spy agent, like out of the movies, and Netflix is making something of The Unexpected Spy, your book. But I picked up something in your book that fascinated me. What do you like so much about pashminas?
I like their versatility, to be completely honest with you. They are easy to pack, right? Because you can fold them up, very tiny. They're incredibly versatile. I could put them over my head, disguise my hair, but then they also keep you warm and can be a blanket while you're sleeping on a plane. So I like their versatility. That's what I like about them.
And how many pashminas do you have?
Now I only have one. And the
Really?
reason, well, let me explain why. So I have a second grader, a 7-year-old, and she loves pashminas, and she has taken all of them, and they are all in her room. So
okay, brilliant. Now, this is Goldster, Purpose, Passion, and Grit. We have a wonderful audience out there. If you've got anything you want to ask Tracy during the show about anything from pashminas to chemical weapons, we do the whole lot. Ask her and she will answer. In fact, as we were talking, she said, don't tell me what you're going to ask me. She likes to do it on the hoof. So surprise her and shock her. You put in the book that you are a political science nerd and you want systems to run smoothly. Was that nurture or nature that brought that about?
I think both. Probably more nurture, but I have a sibling and he is not into that, smoothness. He and I are super, super different. And so I think for me, I have a mom and a dad who are very much into that running smoothly, well-oiled machine kind of situation. But obviously my brother did not embrace that and I did. So that's why I think it's a little bit of both.
So your brother's a bit chaotic and you're the one that likes everything just so.
Exactly.
And when you apply that, systems running smoothly to your political science thing, is the world running smoothly at the moment?
No. That is the short answer to that question. I tell
Has it ever run smoothly?
No. I mean, I think since its inception, right, however we believe about how the world was created, I don't think the world has ever run smoothly, but I think part of that is human nature and diversity of thought and diversity of ideas. We're not robots.
No, but there are times that it's run smoother than others, obviously, because when there's World War, it is not running smoothly, is it?
Of course. I mean, look, it ebbs and flows, right? I don't think there's ever been a time where the world has been without chaos ever. But I do think that, to your point, there are times where it has run more smoothly than others.
Yes, I think. And you said early on in your life, perhaps, when you instead of being a CIA and FBI agent, you wanted to be a school teacher, which you are a bit now. You talked about becoming a teacher and writing an op-ed piece for the New York Times, as if those things would change the world. Do you believe that now or not?
So no, I wrote that op-ed later on, after I had done my time at the CIA and the FBI. I didn't write that prior to joining the CIA and FBI.
Right, but what do you think? I mean, given that concept that teaching the next generation, having a view that's read by millions in a newspaper, and then you see things that happen in the world that are the decisions usually of one or two people. How do you think you can make the world a better place in a nutshell?
Honestly, by teaching the youth, right, and empowering them and inspiring them to go on and be a change force that they can be, because that's really where it starts. I take more of the bottom up approach rather than the top down.
Okay, and do we call that people power?
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, educate, and some years back, at least 2 decades ago, you watched an interview with Osama bin Laden, who was responsible for the 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Center and the consequent war on terror that you were very much involved with. Describe what you felt, what you saw and what you felt, and how that changed your life.
Sure. Well, in order to describe that, to back up just a little bit. So growing up, I'm Jewish. And so I lived, we were the religious minority where I lived. It wasn't that big of a deal, but I started to realize that I was different. You know, outside of our temple, we had metal detectors, we had police officers and police cars all the time. And I always asked my parents, you know, why do we have that? And, you know, they can't really explain that to an 8-year-old. All that well, but I noticed I was different because I would go to social events at my friends' churches and you just walked in. There wasn't any security. And so I always kind of wanted to understand why there was that difference. And so in 1997, I happened to be watching CNN, and it was Peter Arnett and Peter Bergen were interviewing an individual inside of a cave. And, you know, he had 2 kind of AK-47s next to him and security around him. And it was in that interview where he kind of did 2 things that were a little life-changing, I guess, for me. The first was he issued his fatwa, or declaration of war, against the United States. And then the second, which I think appealed to probably a self-centered college kid, was that he issued a fatwa, or declaration of war, against Jews. And so I think for me, I kind of wondered, is this why we had security outside of our temple? Is he the reason why? And so that's what kind of pushed me to want to learn a little bit more about who this person was.
And that didn't, though, trigger your propulsion, as it were, towards the CIA, did it? Directly?
Not to be, you know, trite in the answer, but it wouldn't have, because you have to remember, this is the late 90s-ish. We did not have pop culture like the kids do today, if you will. We didn't have Criminal Minds, Homeland, Zero Dark 30. None of those shows existed. So all I had, and no offense, was Sean Connery and James Bond. And I didn't necessarily see myself in him. Obviously, you know, my brother and my dad were huge fans, but I didn't see myself in him. And to me, the CIA worked sort of this Russia stuff. There would be no reason for me to think that I could work whatever Osama bin Laden's mission was at the CIA, because the reality was it wasn't in my face, and September 11th hadn't happened. Yeah. And so I always try to orient people to the time and why it wouldn't have been a career that I would have necessarily pursued.
Mm-hmm. And you say, you describe quite vividly that when you were going to sort of career day at college, the crowds of people were around the dot-com heroes, the Bill Gates and the Steve Jobs of Apple and Microsoft. And then there was a lonely man at the CIA desk. What happened there?
So And I don't know how things are in England, but in America, we have career fairs at a lot of college campuses. It's not unusual. They kind of gather their little portable tables in main like thoroughfares on the college campuses. And this was the time pre-2000 where you had something called the dot-com boom. A lot of my contemporaries wanted jobs in sort of the dot-com industry. They were paying really well. And so this particular time of career fair just had a ton of dot-com folks looking for people to do internships. This was between my junior and senior year. So a lot of people were applying to those to do internships and then hopefully obviously get a job upon graduation. I had zero interest in that. I actually wasn't going to the career fair. I was just accompanying my friend on my way to my astronomy class. And I saw that there was a table that did say, CIA. Again, it's not unusual that they recruit on college campuses. Both CIA and FBI do. And there was a gentleman there. No one was at the table at all. And it said that they were looking for liberal arts majors, which as a history major, I was.
And what do you what did they tell you, or what do you think that the CIA saw in you in that they called you back and called you in? Because you literally dropped off your resume, didn't you, and had a 1-second conversation?
Sure. I talked to him just, a little bit. I just said, do you guys work, do anything with this Osama bin Laden guy? And again, I'm not stupid, but we have to remember the time frame. This is pre 9/11, right? So it would not have been top of my mind that they would have worked this individual. And so I gave him my resume and I said, do you guys work this like terrorism mission or, this guy? And the recruiter was very honest. He said, look, it's a very tiny group that does that. Most of our hiring focus right now is Latin America because there were a lot of revolutions, coup d'etats, instability going on there. And then Russia. Those were their 2 areas of focus. And they were hiring Russian speakers and Spanish speakers. Neither of those areas were super interesting to me. I don't speak another language. I gave him my resume and really did not think anything more of it. I'm not sure that I'll fully understand why they hired me. They never tell you the answer to that question. Obviously, I had good grades. I had to have good grades. My dad was a professor at the college I went to, and in order to keep that scholarship, I had to keep good grades. So I had good grades. Obviously, I had a broad understanding of world affairs, but I also think I had very good critical thinking skills, problem solving skills, those kinds of things, which you can't necessarily train. I think that was probably something that attracted them.
Now, your book has got a lot of redacted stuff in it. So you're reading there in full flow, and suddenly there's a black line goes across of the stuff that the CIA or the FBI later on has said that you can't say. So tell us what you can say. Once you had been cleared and you had done all of those things, where were you sent? What did you do?
So I can't tell you where I was sent.
Okay.
and the bummer, the redaction. So what you see in the book with the redactions, that is actually 5 full rewrites of my book to get it to look like that. So yeah, that was not just a one-off and okay, I'm going to publish it like this. That process takes a really long time. And when I first submitted it, I had 7 chapters completely blacked out, full pages of black. Right. And so I had to really, some of them I appealed. So there's 2 chapters I appealed and I won the appeal on those. But the rest of them, that took 5 full rewrites to get it to that point. And at that point is when my editor said, no more sending it back. This is how we're going to publish it. So I know, isn't that crazy? The back and forth.
So this is fascinating for those of us who write. This isn't your editor asking for rewrites. This is your security agencies, and then the editor will want their own rewrites.
Right. So it's double, right? Like that process was definitely annoying. And the CIA, look, they don't care if I publish it with 7 chapters redacted. They don't care. I can do that. But clearly, Macmillan St. Martin's isn't going to, publish it like that. And so, and you have to remember every time you resubmit, they don't tell you why it's redacted. You have to figure it out on your own. So you're just playing like a random dart game, trying to figure out why something's been redacted, which is obviously very frustrating. And it goes to a different person each time at CIA. So one person may be fine with this redaction and the other person may not be fine with this redaction. So it's very annoying and very frustrating, and they can always tell you at any time that you do not have permission to print it. So
oh my, and so it's a bit, because you have to give it a new or a narrative arc that keeps us on the edge of our seats. It's a bit like taking Odd Job out of James Bond, isn't it, and working out how to go from there.
Yes, I guess it was a very stressful process. Let's put it that way.
And Emma has asked, interesting, reassuring to hear that you had so many rewrites. How many total rewrites did you have before it was published? The editor and the CIA and whoever else?
Just 5.
Just 5. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So your prose was pristine, and it was just the CIA that messed it up.
Right. It wasn't pristine, but I don't really view the editor who came in and like made grammatical. So I don't really view that as like a rewrite. That's just part of the writing process, right? Yeah. I mean, I guess if we add that, then it would be 2, but it wasn't a full rewrite. It was just, I don't like the way you worded this. So can you, or I just view that as part of the business, right? Of writing.
And you're not allowed to tell us where you went or where you were posted, but you have got a reputation of being a bit of a specialist in tracking down chemical weapons. What is a chemical weapon?
So I did chemical and biological, more biological actually than chemical, to be totally honest. So I worked in Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. So I can tell you the continents. I just can't tell you the specific countries. Right. Al-Qaeda was definitely better at and more interested in procuring biological weapons, to be totally honest with you, because they're cheaper and easier to make. And you get sort of a bigger bang for your buck, if you will. In terms of chemical weapons, they didn't have the capabilities because those are all really things that are made out of synthetic materials, right? Any chemical weapons, for the most part, is not a natural. That's why there's the difference between chemical and biological. And it is tougher for them to procure those because they don't have the facilities, capabilities to make them on their own. Whereas with bioweapons, it really any of us can make them, quite frankly.
A bioweapon is a disease, essentially, isn't it? So
for the most part, it's a naturally occurring specimen.
Whereas, say, sarin or something is a chemical, and so they would have to make it. Yeah,
they would have to either find a country or a person to procure ready-made sarin from, because they don't have the factories and capabilities to make it on their own, and that's a lot. That's a lot of communication and a lot of, which I don't know that they wanted to like open themselves up to necessarily. Has
there been a biological weapons attack recently? I mean, past 20, 30 years?
Well, I mean, I think in the United States, if you look at, and this was actually not Al-Qaeda, but this was an individual who was domestic. Just after September 11th, they kind of got overshadowed because of September 11th. Anthrax letters were delivered to various people in the Senate and other judges, those kinds of things. The targets of those letters did not die. The mail handler, unfortunately, passed away because of exposure to anthrax. But I would say that also we had a cult up in Washington State that poisoned a salad bar with salmonella and got about 300 people sick. No one passed away, but they got 300 people ill as a result of that.
But the sort of worst case scenario, Hollywood movies, let's put it that way, is, for example, an anthrax attack that wipes out whole communities, or a smallpox attack or something like that. Were the groups you were chasing on this, and I know you're limited in what you can say, was there ambition to do something like that?
I mean, it's funny because at CIA, the bummer is we can talk about our failures, that's out in the public, but our successes, right, are never out in the public, and that's super frustrating. And I can say that I stopped multiple biological weapons attacks from happening that would have been very deadly and very large. That's what I have commendations from other countries for doing because I was able to stop them. So it's hard to say. It's such a bummer that I can't.
It's all right. We don't. But are you able to tell us a little bit how it worked? Were you out in the deserts, literally chasing people with files of anthrax, or were you sitting behind a computer screen analyzing stuff that was coming in?
No, I was not an analyst. So that's mostly what analysts do. I was actually very unqualified to do that. Most analysts have PhDs in very specific subject matters and speak, another language so that they can read that traffic. So no, I was out in the field collecting information from sources on the ground, sources in the government, wherever we could get information as to what people were doing and what attacks they were thinking about doing. So I was out in the field.
Yeah. And just to go back to, I think we touched on it. I mean, was there an ambition to actually destroy America through disease, or was it a very limited one of let's go and hit this sort of festival that's going on at the moment?
I mean, do you want me to be honest with you?
Yes, because please.
I think
honesty is what we're all about.
You and your audience may not love the answer to the question. England and Western Europe was their biggest target to decimate the population.
Okay. Why was that?
You're welcome.
Is that because of geographical proximity to the Middle East? No.
No. I'm trying to figure out the best way to say this. You have to remember that after September 11th, we were clearly on high alert right here in the United States. Yeah. We are on very high alert. And I would say that England and other Western European countries were as well, but they didn't have things in place to really track a lot of terrorists. And they were really relying on us to give them information. And that's a good thing. We all rely on each other. And I think that's a good thing. Yeah. I think they found it easier to operate in those countries because of the legal system that existed in those countries.
Yeah.
So your whole audience.
No, the audience that's all over the place. It's not, well, it's not whether we like an answer or not. We want to know what the answer is, and I think that's a good answer. I've got one question, and then Emma's going to has got a question about the donuts and George Tenet. But what is the vault? I know you can only say a little bit about it, but tell us what you mean by it.
Sure. The vault was something that I so at CIA, I'm sorry if this is like too much information, but maybe it helps people sort of understand. I know there's been a lot in the news lately about like top secret clearances and all those kinds of things. So obviously I had a top secret clearance and then something called SCI, which is special compartmented information. But beyond that, you get what's called alphabet soup clearances, and you get sort of briefed into different programs as you need to know them. And so I was briefed into one of those like alphabet soup programs on September 5th, 2001. So 6 days before September 11th. And so I remember asking, it was myself and two other gentlemen in my office, and we had been trying to get as much information as possible from terrorist training camps in Afghanistan. That was our thing. And I think that's probably why they picked us. And so George Tenet and another individual briefed us into this program. And I remembered being, a 22-year-old idiot and asking, am I going to have to kill anyone with this program? And, they're like, not unless there's a big terrorist attack. We're not even going to start this until the late spring of 2002. Well, obviously everyone knows what happened 6 days later. September 11th. And so I started working in the vault. And basically what a vault is, just in the most literal sense, we all work in something called a SCIF, which is a facility within the building that holds top secret information. And it has steel walls. That's pretty normal. We all worked in SCIFs. But I worked in a vault within a SCIF within a building, if that makes any sense.
Okay. You were 3 layers into
Right,
in there.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And so because that program was so sensitive at the time, there's different layers, right, into entry to the program. And so that's what the vault, just in its most literal sense, right, was. And it's very, very tiny. I mean, very tiny. It maybe fit 5 people on like a good day. And so it's very small. And that's where we were running that sensitive program out of, 24 hours a day, 7 days.
Which then, did that kick in immediately then 6 days later?
I wouldn't say like, okay, September 11th, let's go. It took a hot minute to get sort of everything going, right? I would say 7 to 10 days, right? Give it some time.
Yeah. And did you realize on that day that the world was changing and that your 100%. Job was going to change?
100%.
Yeah.
Yes.
And did you think back to, remembering that interview with bin Laden and your thoughts then? Did all that sort of crash together?
No, that crashed together my first day at CIA, right? Going into the counterterrorism center. And that's where I was assigned to work. Yeah. So that for me was more of a first day.
Okay. And were you in the vault? I'm coming to Emma's question now about watching the drones, President Bush looking over your shoulder, and CIA Director George Tenet bringing you donuts. Was that all in the vault, or was that somewhere else?
Sure, Emma asked great questions. I'm just looking at the question to make sure I answer it correctly. Yeah. Watching Al Qaeda members with drones. Yes, that was all in the vault. Yes.
So when you say you can only have 5 people in there, there was you, the President of the United States, Director of CIA, and maybe 2 others. Mm-hmm. Goodness, yeah.
I mean, they're basically over your shoulder, right? Looking at what you're doing. But, George Tenet, I think that was a good thing that we couldn't have that many people in there, to be honest with you, because the work we were doing was very stressful. Yeah. And it required our focus. And the last thing we needed was a bunch of senators and political people in there just playing looky-loo, right? And asking us questions while we're trying to focus. And Tenet was very good at playing, kind of goalkeeper, I guess, if you will. Yeah. And keeping people out of there.
Yeah.
Which was great.
And when you're in I don't know how long were they in there with you for, like hours or minutes?
Depended, to be completely honest with you. It depended on what I'm trying to speak around it. It was dependent on what we were doing, what was going on, and how much action there was.
Okay, so they would come and go, as it were,
We had shifts.
Yeah, you stayed, but I think my thing is that when you're working with like the President of the United States and you and a couple of others, is there a sort of egalitarian equalizer there, or do you call him Mr. President, or do you? How does it work?
I'll be honest with you. I think we called him Mr. President, but George Tenet was so, excuse my language, hell-bent on making sure that no one talked to us and left us alone. We didn't get into a whole bunch of conversations with him.
Yeah, they were watching what you were doing.
Basically, his thing was, you come in here, you shut your mouth, or I kick you out. And I think he didn't mind talking to Bush that way either, if that makes any sense. So no, I mean, Bush was super nice, but and I think I refer to him as Mr. President. I mean, I wasn't calling him George or anything.
And I want to move on to your other 2 great things, which is your battle against sexism and your FBI career. But before we do that, are you able to give us a sort of glimpse into the most frightening or challenging operation that you did in the field for the CIA?
I get asked that question a lot. And it's funny because at 45, I look at scary and frightening very different, right, than I did at 23, if that makes any sense. Yeah. I think in your early 20s, really all through your 20s, in my opinion, you feel very invincible, right? You feel very, not much scares you because death really isn't something that's on your brain, if you will. So yeah, I mean, really all the time I was in scary situations. Right. Now that I reflect back on them, But I think probably the one that was like the closest to, I mean, scary, was, I can say that I was in Afghanistan. So I was in Afghanistan, and I was in a vehicle, and a friendly intelligence, or a friendly military fired on us because they didn't know who we were. And so, that was problematic, and that was obviously a little bit scary, if you will.
Yeah, just a little bit scary getting shot at. And you say you were in Afghanistan. How realistic is Homeland, that TV series?
Let me be honest with you. My husband loves Homeland. I watched one episode and I hated it, and I never watched it again.
Why did you hate it?
So good. I'm glad you asked me that question. Some people don't. I don't know why. I hated it. And it's so funny. I had this conversation with a very big celebrity here in the US. Okay. And she completely agreed with me. From a female perspective, what frustrated me is, why does Claire Danes have to be crazy? Why does she have to have a mental illness to want to do what she wants to do? And that, had they made her not have a mental illness, I would have been okay with it. I mean, look, I have diagnosed depression and PTSD, and all those things are fine, but that's not why I chose to get into what I did. And that's almost how she's couched. Yes. She's a crazy woman, therefore this is why she wants to do what she wants to do. And I was disgusted when I saw that. And so I never watched it again, but my husband loves it.
And did you have somebody in the CIA who was a bit like the Saul character in that, the sort of patrician mentor that's...
Yeah, I mean, most of my bosses, quite frankly, were very much like fatherly figures, I guess.
Yeah. That's good. I'm glad you said that, because we're moving on to the FBI and a character called Bart in just a moment. But before we go on to Emma's question now, which is one I love, Emma, you're just one step ahead of me as always.
That's a good question.
And you have in the book, this is, I think, as you transition between these two agencies, I needed to let go of a feeling responsible for every act of terror in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. You've just talked about PTSD and that sort of stuff. Did it weigh heavily on you?
I think obviously now, right, that takes time. It doesn't develop just, right away. But I also think part of the problem, right, was that right after September 11th, you don't have time to process what just happened, because now you have to react, right? And stop future attacks. So yeah, of course it weighed heavily on me, especially when the 9/11 Commission came out and, really just raked CIA sort of over the coals, and, really put the responsibility of September 11th squarely on us. And so feeling like you're responsible for that, and I know that I'm not solely responsible, but yeah, of course that weighs on me.
Yeah, and it does. And then when you're down in the vault with all this responsibility on your shoulders and the war on terror beginning, Emma asks, how did you find it making friends and dating? Was it easy to choose friends from outside of work, and how was it socially for you?
Sure. It's so funny. On an editorial writing note, I purposely, that was the one sticking point my editor and I had. That was the only thing we disagreed and fought about. I elected not to put anything about my dating life in my book. I didn't want it in there because a lot of times when females put those kinds of things in their book, that becomes all we ever talk about. And I didn't want that, because it's really just a small portion of my life. So that was the one thing we fought about. She really wanted it in, and I kept taking it out, and I won that battle. But
then if I could ask a follow-up question to that very elusive answer that you gave, we are seeing you as Tracy Walder. In the book, you're Tracy Chandler. Is that a marital name change?
Yes. Oh, no. And I'll tell you guys about it. I was just giving you some background, in terms of, no, I all of my friends, and I'm still very good. And so, in fact, they're texting me while I'm on this, are either still at the agency or in the agency. I'm very close to them. They were bridesmaids in my wedding. I am extremely close to my friends. But I will say they all worked at CIA. I didn't have friends outside of CIA because it was just so much easier to be friends with people in the CIA. Once I left, though, my husband, he is not in the intelligence community whatsoever. He is an orthodontist.
Yeah.
So yeah, as boring as we can be.
Okay. You're quite clear because you actually applied to join the FBI quite early on, and then and then things happened. You're quite clear that the FBI is about protecting the homeland.
Mhm.
What is the CIA about?
Yeah, so CIA is responsible for the gathering of intelligence, right? Those are two different things. FBI is responsible for enforcing the law. So the CIA is not a law enforcement organization at all. It's more like, FBI is like Scotland Yard in the same, and, whereas you sort of look at the gathering of intelligence, all you're doing is leveraging assets and those kinds of things overseas to gather intelligence and make recommendations about what we should be doing. That's all.
Right. So what drew you to the FBI?
Oh, I mean, look, I loved my time at the agency. It was amazing. I just didn't want to live overseas anymore. I mean, really, it's that boring. I didn't want to live overseas anymore. And the CIA's main mission is to be overseas. And so I knew I'm not going to change that about them. I don't want to change that. And so I figured if I went to the FBI, maybe I could still do this counterterrorism mission, but be here in the United States the whole time.
And when once you were in the FBI and you did that, what was the main? Was there any sort of cultural difference in the culture, your colleagues, that sort of thing?
Yes, so the cultural difference was very big. I never had any issues at the CIA. Like I said, all my bosses were males. I worked with predominantly males, so I was pretty used to being around males, and I never had any issues. But what I came to realize is there is a big cultural difference between the gathering of intelligence and law enforcement. At least here in the United States, that's viewed very differently. We have to remember the FBI did not allow women to be special agents until 1972. That's really not that long ago. And they were forced to by something called Title IX. So it's not because they wanted to allow women to be special agents. They were forced by law to allow women to be special agents. And only about 16% of the Bureau, even today in 2023, are made up of females as special agents. So it's really low. Yeah.
And you were a special agent.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And you had there's a phrase in here in that difference between the two organizations, and I think this is Bart, but who we're going to get onto in a moment. But somebody says to you, this isn't the CIA, Chandler, no going rogue. Was that a sort of reputation that the CIA had within the FBI, or?
No, I think just in general, the CIA and the FBI didn't like each other. The CIA and FBI have always had an acrimonious relationship, always. In fact, I think they still do, maybe not to the extent, that they had back then, but I think they still do have a very acrimonious relationship. And I think that was the issue.
And why would that be?
It's ego, if you want my honest opinion.
Okay. Male ego or
No, I think basically, the CIA can't pass certain pieces of information to FBI because it involves human sources. The FBI doesn't understand why they can't have that information because they want it. And so it just turns into this like really stupid back and forth, to be completely honest with you. I don't think there's like one singular reason. Yeah.
Isn't that why Homeland Security was, or the Homeland Department was created after 9/11 to break down those silos?
Yes, and I do think it helped to a certain extent, right? In terms of breaking that down, it mandated certain things, but it doesn't change the fact that I'm sure both of those entities talk poorly about each other, right? At their own offices. But yes, that's exactly why it was set up, was just hopefully stop that behavior.
So you're in the FBI, you've been accepted. What is Hogan's Alley?
So Hogan's Alley FBI training is at a place called Quantico in Virginia. And basically there's all different types of training. You have different modules at different times of your training. And Hogan's Alley is something that actually the military uses, drug enforcement agency uses, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, all of those entities use it, but it belongs to the FBI. And it's a mock city. So it has like a laundromat, a library, a school, a trailer park, houses, apartment complexes, all of that. And then hired actors are brought in to play certain roles. And so you get what we call in law enforcement situational awareness. So you learn how to operate in certain kinds of situations. And that's what they do.
So they would have, say, they would have a school shooting episode, say, in that Hogan's Alley, and then the FBI or whichever one is using it at the time would be trained how to deal with that situation.
So FBI is not trained in school shootings because FBI doesn't respond to them. Typically, that's local law enforcement here that responds to them. It would be maybe a hostage situation, a terrorist bombing, those kinds of things.
Yeah. So, I mean, interesting you sort of distinguish what the FBI does and doesn't do. Sue Townley has asked, which agency is responsible for the president's security, and where does the Secret Service fit into this picture of the agencies we're talking about?
The Secret Service is responsible for the president's security. They're the old agency that is. They used to actually be under our Department of Treasury, because Secret Service's main mission actually is not to protect the president. I don't know that a lot of people know that. Their life started as basically currency forgery. That was their thing. That's what they did, was investigated money fraud. Obviously that evolved. And now they are in kind of the Homeland, they kind of straddle Homeland Security and Department of Justice, kind of both of those things, but they're the ones responsible for president's security. We don't really work with them. We don't have a reason to, per se.
Okay, but it's so if they're going, so they do the president. So if the president's going on a visit somewhere, they would work with the local police force, or does the FBI come into that at all? Or
no, not at all. The FBI is really not involved. The FBI may reach out to the Secret Service, or the Secret Service might reach out to the FBI and say, "Hey, are there any threats going on in this area that we should know about?" But no, you're typically not going to see. I mean, where I am right now, I'm seeing police cars out the window because the Undersecretary of Defense is going to be here on this campus today here in the US. And so there's no FBI here. It's all Secret Service and local police.
Okay. You tell a story about catching a foreign spy working on American soil. Tell us that story.
Yeah, so that was one of the first Chinese economic espionage cases that got attention, I guess, here in the US. And this individual, this family, the Mack family, had lived in the US for about 28 years. They became naturalized citizens, all of that. They were from China. They obviously grew up in, I guess, what you would say Maoist China.
Yeah.
Because that would have been the time. They're in their 80s now. And so basically what they were doing is they worked at a company. They had a top secret clearance, and they were stealing. It might not seem like a big deal, but it is. It's called QED technology. It's called quiet electric drive. And what it did was it made the propellers of submarines and naval ships quiet. And so you can't track them on sonar and those kinds of things, which, having the element of surprise in a battle is a big deal, right? And so they were taking that and giving it to China. That's what they were doing.
And you caught them?
Well, my team caught them, but it wasn't just myself that, rolled up there to.
But did you arrest them? Were you the arresting special agent?
No, I was not.
Yeah. And so when you say your team caught them, how big would that team be? How long would you have been working on the case?
5 of us. There's 5 of us on that team. Gosh, I don't know. I don't remember how long we worked the case.
Years? On and off? Yeah.
It would have been a year's type of situation. Typically, CIA cases take place over years and months. Yeah.
And would there have been a trigger that you came across, or one of your colleagues came across, a clue that actually put the spotlight onto these people?
Well, so the original tip had been given by the Department of the Navy. realized that China had this technology. So that's where the tip came from. And then they kind of went backwards and realized, okay, well, this is the group that's making this tech. This is the private company that's making this. Okay, let's figure out the team that's on the development of this. Now let's look into the, right. So it's all backwards.
Yeah.
And so that's how we focused on them, but they were ultimately caught because of their trash. that's how
That's a very common sort of thing, isn't it? You go through the trash and you find the bills and the receipts and the letters, and that catches them.
Well, we had been going through their trash for a long time. They just messed up one day. Right. You know, it's human nature.
That is fascinating. Emma says, with all your experiences working on what would frighten most people, do you fear anything at all in your experience that has turned you into this strong woman full of confidence?
Well, thank you, Emma, for thinking that I have a lot of confidence. I don't. I'm a very insecure person, and I'm relatively shy. I don't know what I fear necessarily. Your fears change, right? As you get older. Now, my biggest fear is anything happening to my child, right? Whereas before my fear, right? So your fears change as you develop and evolve, right? As a human. So, I don't fear things that I maybe should, I don't know, but I fear silly things. Honestly, what I fear most, and I'll just be very frank, I don't mean to get into political discussion, but honestly, what I do fear the most is my daughter being shot at school. That is what I fear the most because of the things that happen here in America. That is what I fear the most.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good, honest answer. I want you to tell us, we're going through this too quickly. Tell me about Bart.
He's just a bad human. I don't know any other way.
Well, you mention him a lot, and then you mention him in the time of the way he treats women and your own campaign about women in the workplace. So just wrap all that up for us.
Sure. I don't think it's the way Bart treats women per se.
Oh, okay.
I think Bart is indicative of how the FBI treats women, if that makes any sense.
Yes, it does. Keep going.
So, I think Bart, the fact that his behavior was enabled, right? That's problematic. It shouldn't have been enabled. And I think that the fact that we do not have gender representation on a more equal footing in law enforcement is problematic because the things that happened to me were unacceptable and shouldn't be happening in the workplace. And the FBI didn't really at the time have a way of reporting those things. And quite frankly, it's still going on. There's a 19-woman gender discrimination lawsuit against FBI's head of Quantico right now going on. And women are reporting that they're being assaulted and those kinds of things. And so that's why, it's why I left the FBI, but then that's why I started teaching national security and law enforcement to all girls, was to try to change that gender dynamic in the workplace. But I think they still have a long way to go.
So what is your message? As I say, when you're teaching a class like that, you've had that experience. We know all around the world that sort of discrimination that goes on. What is your top line message to the younger generation on that?
I wouldn't say I have a message. I don't like to have a message. That's the thing. I want to have women, I want to engage them in this content that I teach. So that way they will naturally want to have jobs in these fields and change the gender dynamic. I try not to have sort of this overarching message, but I would say that, my message to them is if it's something that, if this is a job that you're interested in, you need to go for that job. And seeing someone having that job that looks like them is sometimes helpful.
Yeah. And when somebody, what was that wonderful thing that I think it was Bart said, is that you don't change your clothes because you don't like the way your gun looks on you. That's that sort of crazy thinking, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you to sit there for a second. I'm going to tell our wonderful audience what is coming up next, and then we're going to come back for some final thoughts from you, Tracy. Okay. April 20th, which is in 2 days' time, I am with Danielle Cybulski, who has been making the Middle Ages fun for decades. Her latest book is How to Live Like a Monk, The Medieval Wisdom of Modern Life, and that's how you can use monastic practices to get away from the stress of life Healthy Mind, Soul and Body. That is at a different time. That is at 6 o'clock in the evening British time. I'm not quite sure why, but that's when it is, not 12 o'clock as we are now, which is 7 o'clock in Eastern time in the States. At April 21st, we have got a live show at our Riverstone venue. And Goldster welcomes back Jane Finn, the author of Widowland and Queen High, that are among the most critically acclaimed novels of the year, because she writes an alternate history where instead of Nazi defeat, there's a grand alliance between Great Britain and Germany. And Queen High is Queen Wallis Simpson, not Queen Meghan Markle. And if you want to go to that, email concierge@goldster.co.uk. For some of you, John Hands was originally due on April 21st. He's now with us on June 9th. April 27th, I'm with Peter Popham and his boundary-breaking novel, India Be Damned, a novel of India's partition, which is a brilliant fictional account of India's violent independence. And then April 28th, by a hair's breadth of popular vote, Book of the Month is Franz Kafka's Metamorphoses, a salesman who one day wakes up as a cockroach, and the family tensions that follow, and what it means in the lives of all of us. Have you read Franz Kafka, Tracy?
I have not, but that sounds interesting.
It's 77 pages, so you can read it in a couple of hours.
Yeah, that's short. Wow.
The title of this show is Purpose, Passion and Grit, and you've changed your jobs for 2 or 3 times, but remain passionate about that mission. Would you say, I know you don't like top lines, would you say there's a sort of secret to motivation?
I wish I knew, right? I really do. I don't know what the secret is. I personally think that, to your point, right at the beginning, right? The whole nature versus nurture. Yeah. I do think that because of some difficulties that I had growing up, clearly that affected me, right? And changed me in a way that you can kind of take 2 different roads, right? One is giving up, one is carrying on. And so that was just the road that I chose to take. But I think part of it too is that it was ingrained in me a little bit, just.
Yeah, we've got, I mean, I mentioned the alternate history, Widowland and Queen High just now, and there's a few people write these alternate histories. And we've talked about your career path through Bin Laden, watching that, and the 9/11 and War on Terror and all that sort of stuff. Do you often think about what if we'd done this then, or what if I had done this now? Do you think there could be an alternate history to?
I mean, yes, I think about what ifs, but the problem is if you get too bogged down in the what ifs, you can't move forward. And I think that's why I don't get too bogged down in what ifs, right? Because otherwise I'm sort of stuck in that and stuck in, almost like a hamster wheel, I guess, in terms of thinking. I love alternate histories. I don't have any issues with that. But I think in terms of the work that I did, I couldn't get bogged down in what ifs, right? Yeah. You have to move forward.
I mean, what if can either double up as should have, and then you go down as far as. So I have 2 quick questions to ask you, one on the what if and one on something else. You teach criminal justice at the moment. What are the implications if Donald Trump does end up in jail or indicted, but for American politics or for democracy in general?
Well, we know that he was indicted. He was indicted on separate charges, right? Last month. And that was misusing campaign money.
Or found guilty, I should say. Yeah.
And so he hasn't obviously been found guilty. In terms of classified documents, if he's indicted under the Espionage Act or sections of the Espionage Act, that can have tremendous implications because he's looking at decades in jail. If he is, each charge is about a decade. And I would imagine it would be multiple charges. In my opinion, I think the ramifications it will have on American politics is accountability, quite frankly. I think,
good or bad?
In my opinion, good. I mean, I think, look, if you indict Trump on having classified documents, right, you're going to have to indict Biden and Pence as well, because both of them also have it. And I think it will go far in terms of accountability, because it's frustrating. We see kind of lower level folks being indicted on these things, but not our presidents. And so maybe that's good, to show people that our leaders are not untouchable and not infallible.
There'd be certainly a great little play to be done about the conversation between Biden, Pence, and Trump in their jail cells together, wouldn't there?
That would be a good book.
And my final question is actually the wrong way around, because it's far too big for the final question, but we talk about alternate histories. The way that we're dealing with China now against the way that you saw us dealing with the Middle East and all that sort of thing, any thoughts on that?
I get very frustrated, if you want me to be honest with you, because look, I worked one of these very first Chinese CI cases. No one cared. We had a 5-person CI squad. No one cared. And now people are caring, and now the government's doing something. And it's very frustrating because we've almost given them like a 15-year lead time, if you will, in terms of doing these things. So my hope is now there's enough public anger to maybe drive policy and policy changes. So maybe that's good.
It sounds like a bit of a repeat, like when you first joined, nobody was in, or when you first heard the Bin Laden interview, nobody was interested in that.
Exactly.
And then he had to do the 9/11 strikes for people to get interested. And I hope that doesn't happen this time. I'm gonna ask you a final question from Emma, because Emma's been such a great contributor. Were the wages you earned worth the jobs you did?
No, Emma, they were not. Government salary in the United States is bad, for lack of a better word.
On that note, you have got a meeting to go to, so we're going to let you go, Tracy. Time's wing chariot has flown in. Thank you for your edge of the seat stories, real spying. Thank you. And thank you to our great audience for your contributions. Emma, particularly, you led us on that one. If you want to meet us all on this Friday, concierge@goldster.co.uk for Jane Thin and the alternate histories we talked about. And until Thursday, when we learn about how to all happily live like monks and get rid of our stress, meet me with Danielle Subluski. Until then, stay curious, keep asking, stay involved, stay active, stay safe, and of course, stay Goldster. Goodbye, Tracy Walder. Thank you so much for being a great guest. Bye.
Bye.